Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Metafo. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right today. We've got the second part of our two-part series on managing interruptions and information flow, the information fire hose that comes at us every single day. And, last week we talked a little bit about notifications, do not disturb, a lot of strategies with things like Twitter and email and RSS and those sorts of apps. And today we wanted to talk a little bit further about things that we don't want to deal with right away. How do we deal with that sort of information? That's a real broad category, but I think a lot of things fit into it, especially if you do a lot of reading online.
Yeah. Do we have some follow-up from the previous episode, John?
We actually do. I think this show has become a form of therapy for me, and you've given me all sorts of good advice. I turned off notifications for Twitter.
Oh, perfect. So basically, I continue to shame you into doing things.
You have. I'm afraid that this episode is going to end up the same way.
Oh, no.
But we're not there yet. Let's save that one for a little bit later. The other thing that was interesting since we published that last show is that Twitter, they have this beta where they're changing the way they use their APIs are changing. And those APIs have not been shared with third-party developers yet. And originally they were going to switch to this on, I want to say off the top of my head, it was June 18th. And it was going to do all sorts of things to third-party Twitter clients, like make it so you could not have push notifications any longer. It would affect direct messages. It would eliminate the ability to auto-scroll your timeline. There were a lot of functionality in all third-party clients, whether that's Tweetbot, Twitterific, was going to go away. And 5 of the apps banded together, put together a website, and asked users to complain to Twitter. And they did. I think this was last Friday that this happened. And by the end of the day, Twitter didn't really say that they were going to fix the situation, but they said they're at least going to put off rolling out the new API. And I only raise it because part of this is the notifications that is affected. And it could be that third-party Twitter clients aren't going to be able to provide push notifications to users in the future.
So it worked. The strategy of teaming up multiple developers and complaining very publicly and loudly to Twitter, it worked for now. So fingers crossed that Twitter will eventually realize that this is what I think about this problem is that most people don't care about third-party Twitter clients, but I saw someone made this argument on Twitter, and I think it's a really good point that a lot of the people who make content that people, for lack of a better word, consume, whether it's blog posts or YouTube videos or podcasts or music, those creators, they tend to use these third-party clients. So even though the audience of these unofficial Twitter apps, even though they don't have millions and millions of users, those who use them, they tend to talk about them. And so it's a kind of a chain effect, kind of a snowball effect of, for example, MKBHD uses third-party Twitter clients on Android, or we use third-party Twitter clients at MacStories. And so we talk about them with other people and we expose this problem to a bigger audience. And I think ultimately things can coexist. And I think Twitter can find a way to balance the need for controlling their ecosystem and controlling their network and curating the content that people see and handling stuff like abuse, for example. I want to see how they can find a way to balance that with the open API. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. Controlling the service, controlling the network, and opening up the API to developers, I think it can be done simultaneously. I think that the two things can coexist. So fingers crossed that third-party clients will stick around and will continue to be able to use them because I really like them.
I know.
Especially because the Twitter app sucks. I'm sorry, but it's terrible on the iPad.
It really is. And I feel like we go through this crisis once or twice a year because when I wrote the story about this, I went back and looked at one of your earliest posts on Twitter doing something that was going to screw up third-party apps. And I think it was from 2011, I want to say.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah. Yeah, we've been over this multiple times. I wanted to begin the second portion of this topic by talking about the idea of saving stuff for later. And by stuff, I mean links, interesting links, articles, blog posts, or tweets, or YouTube videos, whatever it is that you find when you're browsing around, when you're catching up on your timeline, and you don't have the time to watch, to read, or to listen to right now. So there's the saving part of where do I actually put this in, like in a temporary holding place. There's the consuming part of how do I get back to this information that I saved. And there's maybe, probably, I don't know, but there's the archiving part or the taking action part of now that I've read this article or watched this video, what do I do? Do I keep it in an archive? Do I delete it? Do I share it? Do I publish it somewhere? And I think it's interesting. And I wanted to know from you, how do you deal? So you're catching up on Twitter or you're catching up on email and you come across a bunch of links. What do you do?
I do a number of different things. If it's an article, it goes into Pocket. Usually there's a first cut that I make when I look at something. Is this something I want to deal with now? Is this something that I want to write and do a link post for on the site? Is this something that maybe is better saved for Friday's newsletter for Club Mac stories? Is it something I just want to read for my, general information or pleasure? So I kind of make that first cut. And if it's something for now, I open it up in Safari and I start reading it and I deal with it immediately. If it's something that falls into one of the other categories, I usually just throw it into Pocket. One thing when it comes to saving things for later, I try not to micromanage this stuff. I just throw it into a bucket and then go back and look at it when I have time, because I kind of feel like that it creates an overhead to collect hundreds and hundreds of articles and then have to, tag them and categorize them and file them and put them in folders. I don't want to do that. For the most part, I throw everything in Pocket, and then periodically, several times a week, I go through and I kind of scroll back through. And if there's something that I've already read, came across it some other way and already read or don't find as interesting anymore, I just immediately delete it. And if it's something for that it's going to create some sort of task, I'll usually copy the link. Sometimes I'll drop that into a task manager. I used to do something where I would take links to tweets and articles and everything, and I'd put it in kind of a check it out category project in things or Todoist. And that just became too much because it was, it just became a wasteland of a bunch of links that I couldn't really tell very well one from the other. And I would just leave them in there and never get to them. So now I try to put them somewhere where I can kind of see them and browse them a little better, like Pocket. But I also, use Watch It Later for YouTube. I'll also take, if I'm doing research for a bigger project, I'll drop the links into something like Notes or DevonThink. The advantage, I think, of Notes is similar to Pocket, where you get the little thumbnail and the title of the article. Yeah. So it's a little easier to browse and go through and see what things are. And it's not just like, twitter.com/status 1235897, that kind of thing. So that's kind of, I guess, a broad overview of what I do. What do you do?
So I've been going back and forth between Safari reading list and DevonThink for even just articles that I want to read. So I had this problem a few weeks ago, and I think I found what actually happened. My reading list was automatically deleting articles on its own across multiple devices. It wasn't just that it was keeping them out of sync. I was saving an article, and I ran some tests with like the iPhone, the iPad, and the Mac in front of me, and I could see the article appearing on all of my devices. And then suddenly one of them was deleting the article as if I were actually manually deleting the link. And then, of course, it disappeared. And I realized this like several weeks after. I kind of had the feeling of, man, I remember I saved a story that I wanted to read. I guess I didn't really save it. And I suppose I lost like a dozen interesting stories that I wanted to read because of this bug. Anyway, I've managed, so I filed a reader. This time I actually filed a reader, and I think I was able to fix my problem, of course, go figure, by disabling iCloud.
Oh,
Turn it on and off and on again on all of my devices. It actually did the trick, and now Safari Reading List is perfect again.
that fixes a surprising number of problems, but
I
it's a
know.
real big pain to do.
I know it is. So the reason I use Safari Reading List as my sort of everything bucket for like anything that I want to read or watch, I throw it into Reading List. It's integrated everywhere on iOS. It's right there for every single link that you tap and hold. You can see the Reading List icon in the share sheet. It works in the background, can automatically download stuff. And it's got the big advantage of supporting Safari Reader and content blockers in Safari. So it's not like I'm using a third-party app that it's got its own web view that doesn't support Safari Reader, which I really like, or it doesn't block ads or other extraneous website elements that I don't want to see. I have a consistent reading experience. So the articles that I'm reading, they look like the environment that I'm used to because I use Safari every day. And here's a pro tip actually. In iOS 11, there's a new automatic Safari Reader mode. So if you take a look at the address bar and the icon on the left side of the address bar at the top, it looks like a text document icon. If you tap and hold that icon, which is the Safari Reader button, you will unlock the automatic mode options that allow you to always use Safari Reader. So every time you open an article, Safari Reader is automatically enabled for every website, or you can automatically enable reader mode for specific websites. So if you like to read, for example, The Verge in Safari Reader mode, anytime you're on theverge.com, you can tap and hold and say, use it always. And the Safari Reader will always be enabled for that domain, which is it's a fun way to customize your reading experience. Anyway, I also like Safari Reading List because it doesn't do anything fancy or custom. When I'm done reading a story, I can invoke the workflow extension or Bear or Notes and save links somewhere else. So its big advantage is that it's the browser that I use every day in a slightly special reading mode. And I actually wish that Apple kind of made a spin-off standalone app for Reading List and maybe even stuff that you save on Apple News. Because right now it's a very fragmented experience. If you save something on Apple News, you save something on Reading List, and you add like a PDF to iBooks, those items are in 3 different places.
Yeah.
Kind of wish that Apple made a single reader app that had my PDFs and my Safari articles and my Apple News content.
Well, that's why I send as much as I possibly can to Pocket because, the problem, I found myself kind of in the same situation where it's like, well, I know I read that, but did I read it on Apple News? Did I read it in Safari? Was I in my RSS reader? That's why I don't use things like starring in RSS very often as a bookmarking methodology. Instead, I just make sure whatever client I'm using supports Pocket, and I throw things into Pocket because you can throw videos in there too.
Yep.
And if you're into it, they also do a really nice job, if you follow other people, of surfacing other articles. You can use it as kind of an Apple News type app to find other information. I don't do that a lot, but every now and then when I've got a little extra time, I'll browse through to see what's popular on Pocket, and a lot of times there's stuff in there that I haven't seen elsewhere. Thanks to Metafo for sponsoring App Stories this week. Your photos contain more data than you think. Metafo is a powerful iOS utility that lets you access, edit, and remove metadata from your photos and your videos. Check essential information such as file size, color profile, shutter speed, ISO, and even the exact location of your photo on a map. The app's date editor helps you organize your moments by changing dates of, for example, scanned family photos, or that travel photo with the incorrect time zone, or even old pictures taken with a different camera. I want to emphasize just how easy it is to edit metadata on scanned photos. You can batch edit the metadata. That means if you scan 100 photos, you can select them all in Metafo and change them all to the correct location or the correct date. It's super easy. You can also fix misplaced location markers and missing geotags with Metafo's location editor. Removing private metadata like location and dates before you post somewhere like Twitter or Facebook is super easy too. And all changes are synced to your iCloud photo library, so they're reflected on all your iOS devices and Macs. One thing I use all the time is the Metafo app extension, which makes it easy to check and strip off metadata just before sharing without changing the images in your photo library or duplicating them. Metafo has a special deal running just this week from April 16th to 22nd only. Metafo's in-app purchase, which unlocks premium features, including metadata removal and location editing, is 50% off. Grab it now for just $1.99, which is a great deal. And please use the link in the show notes so the makers of Metafo know you heard about the app on App Stories. Thanks again to Metafo for supporting the show.
So besides saving stuff in reading list, there's a few other specialized destinations where I archive and say, not actually archive, but save for later. So for example, for Remaster, which is my video game podcast, I keep a note in Bear, which is called Remaster Links. And every time I come across an interesting video game related story, I put the link there. Because then I have a repeating task in things every week when I'm putting together the show notes for the upcoming episode. The task has a link to the Bear note, so I can tap that link and it takes me into the note and I can see all the links that I saved and I can put them back into the shared Google Docs that I keep with Mike and Shade, so we can talk about that story. Also, if I come across something that I think is going to be interesting for the Club McStories Weekly newsletter, I have a workflow that I made for the Trello API that saves a link in a specific, what's it called, list in Trello?
Yes, it's a list.
Yeah, it creates a card in a list in Trello in the board, all these fancy terms for Trello, in a board that we share. So it's a way to say, this is a link for the newsletter, put it there. What else? There's when I come across, on the other hand, something that I want to write about on Mac Stories, I have another workflow, which is called Things Linked, that create a to-do for me in a specific editorial list of the Things app under a specific heading, so under the linked posts heading,
Okay.
and with a specific tag applied. So I can later go into things and say, what are the things? What are the links that I need to write about? And because things allows you to filter by tag, I have options. So I can either say, show me all my writing tasks for today, or I can just go into the editorial project and look under the linked posts section, and I will find all the links that I'm supposed to be writing about.
All right. So now everybody knows when you see 2 or 3 links right in a row quickly, that means Federico's gone into things and tapped on his tag and and seen that he's got 2 or 3 things that he's been holding there for writing about.
Now you know how I work.
The secret is out. As much as I use Pocket, I do have a guilty admission, which I told you about a little bit last week, which I've got to fix this. I open too many tabs, and I open too many tabs everywhere, on my Mac, on my iPad, on my iPhone. On iOS, I kind of feel like, well, tabs aren't really open. There's only a handful of them that are really open. The rest of them are just kind of there in sleep mode, really. But I did run up against the limit. There is a hard limit of the number of tabs you can have open on iOS. Oh my God,
John, this is so wrong.
I know. 500, Federico. 500 is the limit. And I hit it. I don't do that on my Mac because on the Mac, it really can, after a while, it takes a huge performance hit on Mac OS. So, and I'll tell you, what typically gets me in trouble is that I'll be working on a project, an article on the site usually, and I'll have, 6 or 7 tabs open, and then I just don't close them afterwards. And then the ones that are kind of to the left of it are hidden and out of my sight, and the ones to the right of it are kind of the new ones. And unless I get around to clearing out that kind of bottleneck of tabs that I'm really just done with because I've already published something, I never get to the ones to the far left, and then they just accumulate as I do various projects. So that's something that I need to be better at. And one of the things I'm trying to do is send more of it to Pocket, but I try to be really picky about what I save for later, just because I don't want to have an incredibly deep pile of stuff to go through on a regular basis.
You need to fix this. I mean, opening 500 tabs is just unacceptable. I think there's a theme here of trying to save links for later in specialized destinations. So if you know that something is going to be, a link on your website, try to save it in a place where when you open that app or that database, you're just going to find those types of links. It's a good habit to try and form and practice over time to separate your multiple buckets of information. So instead of having like a dump of 1,000 articles in Instapaper or Pocket, try to separate those into multiple silos. So for example, I keep the stuff that I want to read in Safari reading list or even just YouTube videos. But you could argue that maybe I should use the watch later feature of YouTube. And maybe you could, for example, something that I do when I'm researching a topic that I need to work on over time. Like, for example, I've been working on this article about HomeKit and HomeBridge, the stuff that I'm doing with home automation.
Right.
And it's a topic that it's evolved and changed over time. So instead of keeping those links in a note or in Safari reading list, I'm keeping them in a database in Devonthink. And I save them as web archives so that I can search across the full text of the original web page, which is saved as an offline copy. And that's one of the features that is missing from Safari reading list. It doesn't let you search for the text contained within the web page, only in the title. So my suggestion would be, if you're the type of person who saves a lot of stuff for later, whether it's a podcast or a link to an article or a video or a cool video game that you want to check out, as much as it's convenient to have a single destination, sometimes that can become a problem because you end up like John with 500 tabs.
Yes.
And the constant doubt that maybe something cool is lost within that sea of tabs. But really what you want to do is you want to preemptively organize. So use different workflows, use different extensions, use different apps so that everything is automatically organized for you instead of having to search, because search is no fun.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think you've hit on something that I think is useful too, which is related, which is that I think it helps if the place you're saving is related to the place you're finding the stuff. So as you said, Safari reading list, or if you're already on YouTube, why not just put it into watch later? Because you'll undoubtedly go back to YouTube if you use YouTube. That sort of thing. Another app worth maybe mentioning is Charm. I don't really use Charm much anymore. It's an app for saving tweets.
Oh yeah.
And it does a nice job because it'll actually save conversations and that sort of thing, which not a lot of other apps do very well. I mean, I think Twitter links sometimes are just not very easy to go back to because they tend to just be URLs that are kind of meaningless by themselves. So having some, even in notes, tweets don't really give you a very helpful preview.
Exactly. And what bothers me, and I think I filed a radar about this last year with Apple, is that the Twitter link previews that you get in iMessage are fantastic. So when you share a link to a tweet with someone in the Messages app, the link expands into this bubble preview that shows you the text, the author, and even images, if there's an image attachment. If you save a tweet in the Apple Notes app, it's just a stupid bubble that says twitter.com and nothing else. It doesn't show you anything.
It just takes up space at that point, which is kind of annoying.
There's also, I have this dilemma every time I'm saving tweets for later. I know that the Twitter app now offers a bookmarking feature, but for the longest time, and because I use a third-party client which doesn't Twitter bookmarks, I don't think they have an API. So I'm using the faves or likes to save stuff for later. But that introduces a problem of like an ethical problem of sometimes I'm liking horrible things because I'm saving them for later.
Right.
And so it looks like I put a little heart on a tragedy, which is unfortunate because it's not like I'm liking that event. I'm just saving it for later. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. And I gave up doing that a long time ago, partly because of that. I mean, that's why I try to take them out of Twitter and put them somewhere else.
Yeah.
I'm still not satisfied with any of the places that I put those things. It's better if within the tweet there's some sort of link, and that's a lot easier because you can just long press on the link and put it in Pocket or Reading List or whatever you wanted to use it for.
So I wanted to ask you, do you use both Pocket and Instapaper?
No, not anymore.
Okay.
Instapaper was the first Read It Later app that I ever used. I think I actually used it before it was even an iOS app, when it was just a web service. And I'm kind of torn between that and Pocket. I like some of the social and discovery aspects of Pocket, but the reading experience is a lot better on Instapaper in terms of, the typography and the margins and the spacing. Just the overall look is much better for reading. It feels like reading a book more than reading a website. But I guess it's been a while now, maybe 18 months ago, maybe a little longer. I thought I ought to try Pocket again, so I did. And I just didn't feel compelled to go back either. I mean, I don't think that those services are quite as necessary as they used to be, partly because of things like Safari Reading List, and partly because I've moved more towards RSS than I did before. So I see a lot of things there and don't necessarily save them. But for now, it's really just Pocket that I use.
Do you do the thing where when you're reading RSS feeds, you use the star feature of RSS?
No, I really don't. I don't, because it's one of those things. It's another splinter. It's another place to go looking to see what I starred. I figure when I read something, at least even if I just read the headline, I can decide right there, is this something to read now? Is this something to throw in a Pocket? Is this something to create a task from? What I don't want is, I guess, as we said before, buckets that are disassociated with a lot of the places where I do my work.
Yeah, it's I know that I said that it's beneficial to save things where they belong, but I think RSS and the starring feature is an exception to that argument, because I don't think of RSS as a place where I go and find old links. I see it as a container, like a stream of new articles.
Right.
But I found that I kept forgetting about my favorite posts in RSS, so the things with the star on them. And what I do instead, because I think of RSS as an extension of my browser, basically, because when I tap on a story, it opens in Safari View Controller.
Mm-hmm.
So RSS is just infrastructure, it's just a service. So what I do, instead of starring them, I tend to save them in Safari Reading List or, Trello or whatever. I don't think of RSS as a container of old information, but just as a stream of new things where I can then decide where to save them. But really, the main buckets for me would be Safari, Devonthink for long-term archival of things that I need to research, and Trello for the Club McStories newsletter, and a few notes for highly specific activities, such as putting together show notes for podcasts.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you a top tip, and I'm going to fix your workflow, Federico. And I think your approach to RSS is exactly right. And I think you ought to apply it to Twitter too. Stop bookmarking with the heart.
Yeah.
Because it's a real-time feed of information, which is not a place to save information. You got to find somewhere else to put it. I don't have a lot of good solutions, just because, as we just talked about, it's hard to get a nice preview of a tweet link, but keeping them in Twitter is not a good solution.
Yeah, I know.
Except maybe, I suppose, if you use the official client now that they have the bookmarking feature, which I haven't really used much myself.
You're right. I got to stop doing that. What would you say we have learned from discussing the way that we manage information and information overload and all these links and interesting things coming at us every single day?
I think one of the keys is to reevaluate it periodically, because it's the sort of thing that builds up and it sneaks up on you. It's whether you're subscribing to more feeds or following more people on Twitter or downloading apps with new sorts of notifications. Before you know it, things are coming at you at a rate that exceeds what you can handle. So I think it's important to kind of reevaluate that on all fronts periodically, whether it's email, text messages, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is, and figure out what are the things you're getting that you don't need to see right away, is really what it comes down to, I think. And then pare those back so that you're only getting information that's critical for you to know about, within however many minutes.
Yeah, I agree. And I would also add that if you find yourself doing specific tasks in different apps. So for example, I think of Safari as the place where I read, and I use Trello as the place where I collect all kinds of information for the newsletters, and I take notes for everything else. Try to change your habits so that they fit the apps that you're going to use later. There's no point in insisting on saving everything into a single place, because then you're going to be frustrated. I think there's a lot of benefit in adapting your workflow to the apps and the systems and the services that you're going to use later anyway. Because I could save all of these links in Safari, but then I would take me a lot of time every single week to go through all these links and process them again. So employ automation or extensions or workflows, scripts, whatever it is, but just make sure that the moment when you're saving stuff, it goes directly into a place where it's contextual to the activity you're going to do there later.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And also, I would, to the extent you can, keep it simple, because I think that if you set up a very complex system that requires you to move this here and then move it over to this other place and then tag it and then put it in a folder and then manage it, what'll happen is at some point you'll get busy and you'll fall behind, and then it's just a mess of information. So to the extent you can keep it simple, I think that that's useful as well.
Yeah.
All right, Federico, I think that that's a good place to put a pin in this one and move on to another topic next week. I want to thank our sponsor again, Metafo, and let you know that you can always find me and Federico writing over at macstories.net and on Club Mac Stories. Federico is on Twitter too. He's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.